Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Strickland. I'm your host, Shwin and This episode 527. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host Stacy. That is at StacyPan89 on Twitter. Stacy, how are you doing on this Wednesday afternoon?
Doing pretty well. Can't complain.
Victory Wednesday, as they call it around these parts, to some people anyway. Maybe not many watching this podcast. All right, we're not here to talk about Victory Wednesday or Victory Any Days. We're here to talk about basketball. We're here to talk about the Knicks. We're going to do that. Before we get started, I do have to make a few announcements. First, Strickland has a YouTube channel where we watch this podcast. If you haven't done so already, please like, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment. That'd be a huge help to us. Strickland also has merchandise, which you can find on our website at www.strick.land. There's a link that'll take you to our merchandise store, and there's all kinds of cool stuff on there, like t-shirts, sweatshirts, hats, coffee mugs, water bottles, you name it, we got it. Strickland also has a Patreon, which you can subscribe to. There are a number of different tiers. There's $6 tier that gets you access to Strickland, the podcast that I host every Friday with Prez. You also get access to Takes from Ivan's Boso's podcast, hosted by Andrew Steele, aka Doug, along with Zach Blatter, and you get access to the Strickland Discord. The conversation never stops there. For the tiers, there's a $9 tier that gets you access to Strickland Road, a pod that I host with YC, where we rant and rave about the Knicks even more. You also get access to a wonderful premium articles by Matthew Marino, one of the best in business, and you get access to Strickland NFL, which you guessed is a podcast with the NFL that is hosted by Constantine Metricos and Desmond Novak. There are further tiers. There's $15 tier, $30 tier, $50 tier, and a $100 tier that's going with a variety of additional benefits, like listening on our pod recordings, merchandise discounts, and potentially ghost to podcast alongside yours truly one day, whether you choose to subscribe. Not necessarily possible that you, and not necessarily possible without our great sponsor, FanDuel. If you're looking for the best odds, if you're looking for the best betting props, check out FanDuel. They got you covered. All right. Well, Media Day was yesterday, and we were going to record yesterday, but Stacy had just uncontrollable diarrhea, so we had to reschedule for today.
Not from the mouth this time.
So rescheduled for today. No, I don't think that it's too much of a big deal. All right, I want to just cover some things that happened on Media Day, and then we can get into, we got footage from the Knicks' first practice of the season today. I don't think anything from that was particularly revealing, although there are those who disagree. So we will discuss all these things. Okay, first of all, the Knicks. Okay, at Media Day yesterday, I thought the most revealing thing, which actually wasn't something that occurred at Media Day, not even revealing, but most consequential thing, probably a better way of putting it, was Shams reporting that Malcolm Brogdon was not just going to be, not only are the Knicks going to be bringing him into camp, but he will be playing a prominent role off the bench this season, which would mean that they need to make moves, or a move anyway, to open up a spot for him off the bench. We know what their cap constraints are. We know that they have to move off of one of their players to open up that space for him, be it Tyler Kolek or Pacome Dadier. We went over extensively on the last pod, the benefits of, or what the consequences of moving, of salary dumping effectively Kolek versus salary dumping Dadier, what those would be. I don't think we need to go into that in too much detail again. But needless to say, moving either player allows the Knicks to open up two end-of-bench slots for veterans, one being for Shamet and then the other for Brogdon. The additional benefit you get if you choose to move off of Dadier rather than Kolek is that later in the year you can sign a prorated veterans minimum contract for a third guy, which could be, at least presumably on the surface, could be somebody like a Garrison Matthews, who is also at camp with the Knicks. I guess where I'll just ask you is, I think there's a school of thought where it doesn't actually matter which one moves, because the Knicks are in a win now window, and if whichever one of these players has to go out to bring in veterans who the front office maybe feel are better suited to the purposes of winning this season, then that's a sacrifice that needs to be made. I kind of understand that point of view, but I disagree with it in terms of, I think between Kolek and Dadier, especially if you're bringing in Brogdon, especially because we know they've already brought in Clarkson, that Kolek clearly is the one that should go out, because there's no real role or minutes for Kolek in any scenario almost, barring, obviously extensive injury issues. Whereas for Dadier, maybe you don't believe in him, maybe you don't trust him, but the Knicks effectively still only have 3 wings on this roster. They have OG Anunoby, they have Josh Hart, they have Mikal Bridges. They will have a 4th eventually at some point in time, in Mohamed Diawara, who will be signing a contract using the second-round exception. And then they would have Dadier. Obviously, Diawara, like Dadier, has much to prove in the NBA. As promising as the glimpses of what he's capable of were in Summer League. So to me, I just feel like given that, and the fact that, wings are obviously more kind of fungible, right? They're easier to kind of play together. You don't need to necessarily have a defined position for them, and whereas Kolek is clearly only a 1, he cannot play the 2. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. And then as I mentioned to you previously, like I also just think like I don't think they're high on Kolek, like and maybe they're not that high on Dadier either. Although some of the reporting makes me kind of feel like it's a little bit like when they were dangling quickly for a year, 2 years before they actually moved him, where it's like we have to figure out what this guy's value is more so than we're actually going to trade him now. But with Kolek, it's like, look, they brought in Delon Wright at the deadline last year, and now this offseason, the first signing they made, right, was Jordan Clarkson on a guaranteed veterans minimum contract, and they're aggressively trying to open up a space, and presumably will open up a spot for Malcolm Brogdon to be on the roster. And it's like, I don't know, to me, the writing is on the wall. I think this is a clear signal that the organization probably doesn't believe that Tyler Kolek is either ready to help them win now or will be good enough to help them win now and presumably into the future. So, and again, he's 25 now, so he's not a young rookie, or sorry, not a young second-year player, I should say. And I don't know, like to me, that's the straightforward move. I think maybe there's some galaxy brain, like let's see what Dadier is worth and maybe what we get back that down the line. Like, maybe there's something going on there. But to me, it just feels like if the goal is to win this season, then even within that kind of minuscule or that very narrow framing, I'd rather have Dadier than Kolek, and I'd rather have Dadier than worry about opening up a fucking prorated veterans minimum contract at some point in like January or February for whoever. I don't know. That's just me though.
Yeah, the thing is, normally if you say, well, they signed people ahead of a rookie or a young player, a second-year player, you'd say, well, that's not a death knell, right? They might have ideas about his upside that would, say that, yeah, we'll keep him. Right now, we need someone, right? We can play both sides of that. With Kolek in particular, he was drafted as a he's ready now kind of guy, right? He was 22, 23 when he was drafted. If you see the areas that he's good at, those are kind of where you see more players get improve over their career when they don't have it, right? He is a capable shooter. He can get to, he's a good ball handler. He can run the offense. He has great court vision, good understanding of the game. To the extent that he's a limited defender, he's, from what we've seen, he's good at getting in gaps. He's good at creating events.
Is he good at getting? Is he good at getting in gaps?
Well, not as well as maybe Anthony Edwards, but he's
How about Antonio Cromartie?
Well, that's an unparalleled legend. Oh, sorry, Elon. But he has some of those traits where you're like, you got to play this guy 10, 15 minutes. Can he survive on defense? I think Kolek has shown enough that like he has enough to be a competent backup guard on a team. there isn't a whole lot more upside than that. And you're now seeing that because these guards have been devalued, we've talked about this, right? Smaller guards have been devalued. There's a few years ago, maybe a guy like Malcolm Brogdon or Jordan Clarkson doesn't go for the minute, even though they've both had kind of a little bit, they're aging. Brogdon's had the injury issues. Clarkson, he's just in a very specific fit, and he's older, and that has hurt his efficiency, or maybe it hasn't. We'll see, right? But those guys, if those guys are available, then you look at it and you're like, all right. Now you might say Kolek, you spent a bunch of assets to get him. This isn't a front office that has generally been attached to the sunk cost fallacy, or to sunk cost, I should say. There, I think.
Well, yeah, no, it's sunk cost fallacy too. I mean, that's kind of, they're both tied together, right? Sunk cost and sunk cost fallacy.
Exactly. So I don't think that would prevent them from making a move like this. And that tells me that if you're bringing guys in to help you now, that wasn't the Kolek pick. That was the Kolek pick. Like, this is a guy who can come in, maybe move Deuce to the 2. Ideally, he would have beat out Campaign, and maybe that's a Tibbs thing. I think if the front office thought it was a Tibbs thing, they would give it another year. But they're clearly.
I mean, we all watch Summer League. Like, I'm going to be clear about this. I didn't come away from Summer League like, this is the worst player ever. How the fuck could they have drafted this guy? He's hopeless. But I also think, like, it's fair to look at Summer League for a guy who's going to be age 25 entering his second year in the league and just be like, this is not, like, you're supposed to be crushing these guys. Like, you're supposed to be dominating at this point.
It's a little, but yeah, I think that's fair to point out, because I will compare him to a guy like Quickly, right? Who, if you want to say this is a Tibbs thing, well, the front office bought Tibbs' evaluation, right? They could have easily said, we have Derrick Rose, we're not re-signing Peyton. And this is back in 2021, the free agency summer. He could have easily said that. Now, Kemba was a good bargain. I still don't. I don't think you hate the Kemba move in retrospect either.
No, it's like, I think it's kind of funny though in basketball, because the contracts are all guaranteed. There's like a lot more. It's like your mistakes hurt a little bit more than they do in like the NFL, right? Where it's like, if you fuck up a free agency move, if you're a good GM, it's usually not that hard to like pivot off of it and move off it and make it not hurt. Like, I mean, like, for example,
Bryce Huff is what
yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Like, that was a huge fucking disaster for the Eagles, and it was so bad, it was so awful that they won the Super Bowl and then traded him to the fucking Niners.
And they won the Super Bowl on the strength of what he was supposed to help without
right. and then they traded him to the Niners for a pick. It's to bring it back to Kemba though. Like, I think it's like, it's fair to classify that as like, that was a bad move among their worst, I guess. But the logic of it at the time, and then the actual dollar value involved, like, I'm never going to sit here and be like, oh my God, how the fuck did Leon Rose do this? Like, you could convince me that you believe, not you necessarily, but if people believe, I watched him this last year in Boston, he's washed, and this is a bad signing. Yeah, I'm sure there are people that said that, and kudos to you. But like, if you're not sold on your options in-house, and obviously you knew Derrick Rose, like, yeah, we want to bring him back, but we know he's not the point guard of the future, right? Like, yeah, like I think it was a reasonable kind of like.
Well, they also liked him coming off the bench, right? So.
Right, and I just think it was like a reasonable gamble to take, to your point anyway.
Yeah, and it was $8 million, right?
Yeah,
I think if you could, but I think it was, but even Quickly, right? Who they clearly still had, if you don't want to use the word doubts, were like, well, this isn't a full-time point guard.
They also hadn't seen enough of him, right? So you didn't see enough of him to make the informed decision or whatever.
Yeah, but I think they knew him well as a prospect. I think they saw him as a point guard one day. Then they also realized, if we made the 4 seed last year and we want to get to the next level, or we want to improve on that, a veteran who's done that in the playoffs before is probably, we could use that. But if you looked at the summer league, to your point, Quickly we would agonize over his shooting performances and the terrible shots he took. he was still putting up 30-point triple doubles, right? To your point on Kolek, right? Like quickly was he was there in summer league. He was clearly now was the decision making and all, and that's influenced by you never played with these guys. And when you didn't see that with Kolek, you saw it with Grimes, right? Grimes is not an initiator by any means. When he was allowed to initiate in summer league, he showed that I can do it against these guys. But that's to me, that's not even it with Kolek. I think he's a high floor. I think he can play backup guard for a lot of these teams. For a championship level team, if there are other options available, he's not giving you a better option. And then you're like, all right, but he's young. He has upside. 23, 24 now.
He's 25. He's going to be 25. He's 25 now, I think.
Yeah. So now you're looking at it like, and it's not even Obi where he's like super productive when he plays in big moments, right? Even with Obi, we saw that. And he's behind.
Sorry, he's going to be 25 in March. I just to be clear, he's 25 in March. So
yeah, don't be adding years, bro. We of all people.
Yeah, I can't. I definitely can't. It's a lot of years.
So that from that standpoint, it makes sense. Daddy is still. I mean, given the smoke, it depends on how much you think that. Do they think he's Kevin Knox, or do they think he is, one of these guys? If he was drafted 2 years away from being there, not 2 years away from being 2 years away, but actually 2 years away from being there, what has his progress been? Only they can know that. And if they decide they need to move off, I would say that would be an evaluation of what they've seen. What they've released and what they've told us is that he shoots well in practice. He is 6'9" with a 6'11" wingspan. From what I've seen, he has good defensive instincts. Prez disagrees with this part of my evaluation. I think it's either strength or just I don't want to say an aversion to contact, but it seemed like when he was feeling it and he was playing hard and hitting shots, the 50-50 balls that a guy like that with his tools should be able to get, he almost always lost. He was in the right place and just lost them. So I thought that was a strength thing, and he's very young, so that made sense to me. Prez disagrees given his shooting abilities, core strength, and all that, which I think he ended up being right on because we saw that Quickly was able to play much bigger than his size. And I had said at one point that Quickly's biggest thing is strength. And Prez had said, no, it's it's not that. You can't launch from 30 feet away without great core strength. And it showed out on other areas of the floor. But I think the question would be, do you think there's a point where Dadier either becomes a starter or becomes part of a bigger trade, becomes one of your better assets? I think Dadier's value is just hard to know. He was a late first-round pick, but he's toolsy. I think Kolek's value is pretty easy to know. He's filler, right? Like, I don't think you have to give up an asset or a second-round pick even to get rid of him. But he's filler, right? With Dadier, it's tougher to know. But if they think that it's closer to the lower end of the spectrum, it's not likely to get better. And yeah, you didn't mention Garrison Matthews, but if they want to keep him too, if they think he'd be better this year, and you're not going to get that much upside from Dadier, but it really depends on if their internal evaluation says Dadier is going to be is on the trajectory to be a player one day, whether that's a 7th or 8th man or potential starter. I don't think they would move him to make room for Shamet. And that's the other question I wanted to ask you. Do you think is Shamet over Matthews kind of a done deal? That's how I think people are treating this, and I'm like, I don't know. Matthews is.
I mean, that's how it was kind of reported. That's how it's been reported. I think Shamet has built-in credibility with the organization, obviously with his teammates. I think Shamet's done. I think he's actually going to get 100% going to get a contract. I think Brogdon's going to get a contract. I'll throw this. I think I'll maintain this. I think Kolek's gone. I think they have a deal in place probably, or a couple deals in place that they can move on. But they're going to give him training camp. Just, hey, let's see. Let's see if the kid, you know what I mean? Might as well see what he has for a few weeks here, right? And maybe he shows on preseason. And maybe you've already decided, even if he shows on preseason, you're going to move him.
But it
doesn't hurt. Yeah, it doesn't hurt, right? It doesn't hurt to see what happens. And I guess you always run the risk of injury, but I would say that somebody with my background, understanding that when you're ground bound, you have some certain advantages. I don't think Kolek, as a ground bound player, runs the same risk of injury as, say, like anybody who can jump in the NBA.
That's a
But
little racist, Shwin.
I don't think it's racist. I think it's just true. Tyler Kolek, not a vertical athlete. Um, but um, like it's also possible that, again, like, so like let's live in this world, right? It's like, okay, they're gonna move. We already know we're moving Kolek, right? We already know that. And like you mentioned, there is this potential for, hey, we might want to bring in a prorated veterans minimum guy later in the year. We can't do that if we just dump Kolek. Let's do some legwork here, and let's at least start seeing what the value is for Pacome Dadier. Let's just see what his value is. Let's see, what the league thinks of the guy. And you know what? Hey, Deuce is eligible for an extension coming up in January. Um, we're not that interested in moving him, but if that becomes contentious, maybe let's just see what
You
his
want to
value is.
know, right?
Yeah, you want
What's
to know.
you don't
That's
want
the
to be
job.
like, oh my god, like what we heard happened with the KP trade, right? You don't want to be caught under the gun.
Yeah,
I'm
that
not
was
saying
bullshit.
it's KP, but
No,
if
I'm saying it's bullshit. Like, they definitely did legwork on that, or whatever. We don't need to get into the. We don't
but
need to
if
debate the
that's
KP.
if that's a risk, right? Then you should be doing
Right.
legwork, right? Like you should be
Right.
saying, what
Well,
is Deuce's value? If I need to pick up the phone tomorrow and call
right.
Nico Harrison, which should be your first call apparently on any trade these days, then what's it going to be, right? So
Cooper Flag. Okay, yeah, we'll do that. Great. Yeah. So where do I sign up? No, and I mean, I think like the perfect point, or not it's a good point, but also like an example that we're just seeing right now. And I'm not saying I don't know that the Rockets haven't done any legwork. I have no clue, but like Fred VanVleet gets hurt, so now their point guard situation, right, is Reed Shepard, who you could loved him as a prospect, did nothing last year as a rookie. Was not good in the NBA. Played minutes in the G League. Was good in the G League, but like has not proven anything in the NBA. And then Aaron Holiday, who is, it's Aaron fucking Holiday. Like, who gives a shit? And then it's like, then you've already got, like, obviously,
well,
right?
they have your primary ball handler is your small forward, right? So and now
Well,
you have
yeah, but
another
it's
one. Depending on your
yeah,
thoughts on KD, they're going to have the
right.
ball.
But it's like that's not really what you want in a half court facilitator. Either of those guys, no matter how talented you think they are. And
Amen.
Amen, I don't think
He's a point guard.
he's not
He's a
even at
really
that
good
level.
passer. He just can't
Not
shoot.
right now. Not right now.
Is it because of pull up shooting or any
He
shooting?
can't run a half court offense. Being able to run some pick and rolls and like have nice assists is not running an offense. That is not what that is. And he's not capable of that right now. Anyway, the point is not to get into, we don't need to debate the because I think Amen's great. He's awesome. But like they could be in a situation where it's like, oh shit, like we need to make a move a point guard. What do we do? Right. And it's like, again, I have no idea if they have or not. But that's like the kind of situation where you would like to have an idea of what the league thinks of Reed Shepard or whoever. Name a player, doesn't really
Jabari
matter.
Smith, even right?
Yeah,
If you
Tari
have to,
Eason.
you have
Yeah,
a ton of
Tari.
front court depth, right? If you have to move Eason or Smith, yeah,
Right. Yeah, Tari Eason, whatever. You can name 50 fucking guys. What does the league think of this pick we have, that pick we have, all these type of things? Luckily for the Knicks, they don't have to worry too much about picks because they don't have any. But like
that's more reason to know if we need to
right,
recoup or if we want to
right.
produce.
And so like and so this is like, to me, I think there's a lot of intelligence gathering going on here, but when it comes down to it, I think Kolek is the guy that goes out. I think Bogdan gets signed, and I think if at some point in season they're like, you know what, Pacome isn't progressing the way we want, or we just really need to add an extra body, whatever the fuck happens, right? I mean, let's just even say, for example, let's even say this, for example. Let's say the Wizards are looking at their roster and they're like, you know what, we're not going to be able to trade Chris Middleton at any point this season. Let's fucking buy him out before the season, and he can go wherever the hell. I mean, then if you're the Knicks, you might be like, all right, Pacome, like we're not sitting around waiting here. Like we're moving. We want to know where that's when and you want Middleton. That's a perfect situation, right? Where you're like, hey, you know what, Pacome, you're out. Kolek, you're out. Brogdon come in. Chris Middleton come in. Like these are the type of things that I think you always. It's why you do the legwork. It's why you want to understand your player's value. It's not because these situations are likely, because the scenario I just laid out involves like complete, like 3 different things that need to happen. But you want to be prepared for those situations. And I think this front office has shown that they are constantly prepared for those situations, or at least try to be prepared for those situations. So that was my main take on that. All right, moving on from the Malcolm Brogdon of it all. Josh Hart had some quotes. I think they're fine, but I'm curious to get your thoughts on it.
We're in year 4 of Josh Hart? 3?
Yeah, look, let's
he does
okay.
This shit.
So Josh Hart basically was asked, how he would react if he's not a starter. He said, he jokingly said like he'd go and demand a trade, and then after he got his little ha-has in, he went on to say, that ultimately it would be wrong for him to say that after he talked about how he was kind of a servant to the quote unquote better players in the team last year, and that ultimately the decision is Mike Brown's, and that whatever Mike Brown decides he wants to do or what he doesn't want to do, he'll be cool with. I don't know. I'll let you go first. I don't know. Did you have any thoughts on this, or did you think of it more as just like Josh just has to say some stuff, and ultimately Josh will do the good team player thing?
This is the motherfucker who tweeted about drinking his wife's breast milk. Am I wrong about that?
That is correct.
This is the guy who just trolls incessantly. No, I'm not worried about any of that. One, the best player on the team is his best friend and co-podcast host. We've talked about it a million times. Like the worry of Josh Hart causing a stink, because even if he gets down to 20 minutes, one, he's gotten paid. Two, yeah, he's on a winning team. He knows what he brings. I think they've made it very clear to him that they value him. And throughout his career, he's been in situations where he was in Portland, right? And he's still trying to get paid. He didn't cause he was getting minutes, but he was on the worst team. He wasn't demanding trades. In LA, there was constant trade rumors, right? And he'd say, "Look, talk to Lakers fans. They liked him. He was a good player for them, even as a younger player." He's never done that. We know what he's going to do. He's going to be professional. He's going to show up. And, he trolled with that comment. If you want to say anything, you would say it's an indication that Mike Brown will have to develop his players' trust. He's generally been on the very high end of that, especially for veterans. The Keon Ellis thing is it's one thing. But that's when he's known as a player's coach, right? He coached LeBron. LeBron liked him a lot. The Lakers hired him in part because of just his credibility with guys like that, with veterans. So that's not an issue. And I think Hart probably knows that. Yeah, it didn't work out with the starting 5. Does he feel a little bit like he's singled out in that criticism because that's the guy who gets singled out? Yeah, I'm sure that's a thing. He averaged near a double-double with almost 6 assists to boot, right? Yeah, it wasn't efficient, but he can point to that. You got him paid, man. You're guaranteed for a couple of years. Are you worried about them trading you? Maybe. But he's not the guy that would cause a stink. Like, for all of his, I think, you look at the second law of thermodynamics, right? Like, if entropy increases somewhere or decreases somewhere, it has to increase somewhere else. So if he's a professional on the court, this is his way of getting that out, being a little bit, goofy at times on his podcasts or in interviews. No, I don't worry about that at all. I will say, added to that, I think Deuce started today, or Deuce was wearing the gray
No,
jersey.
Deuce wasn't. Mitch was.
Mitch was.
I don't think it means anything. Mike Brown already said that.
Yeah.
He's gonna
So,
switch it up.
and when Mike Brown says he's going to try things, Tibbs tried things, right? When he first started, right? When he first started, I would say that he tried things in preseason. He was playing Dennis Smith Jr. He's playing Rivers. For all the flack we want to give him about, he was too rigid or whatever, he did choose quickly over Rivers. Quickly got the minutes. Rivers didn't. And you can say that was an obvious choice. But
it's more that like once he's done with you, he's just like, yeah, that's it, dude. Like you're not.
But you're
not playing ever again.
Yeah. But until that point, he'll give you too much leeway, right? But the point is, he was a new coach, right, with a new roster. And that's where Brown is. So, and if the default ending lineup for last season was Mitch, he's going to start. I think that's the thing. But I would be surprised if Hart started, but I'd also be surprised if he got less than 25 minutes a game. That might be being conservative. Probably going to play 40 like he did last year, but he's going to be. And hell, I would tell Josh if he's actually a little bit, if he's in his feelings about that, I don't think he is, because I think he's a smart guy and he would realize that if you come off the bench and you're still putting up, close to 10 rebounds a game with 4 or 5 assists, there's an end of the year award that you would not be eligible for if you started, right? And I don't know what that means in terms of compensation or whatever, but there's benefits to that.
Yeah. I didn't take much from it. I think he's happy to be like pulled from the starting lineup. No, I mean, I think if that's the outcome, like he said it himself, he views himself as a starter. But like, you got to get the fuck over it. And I think that he would get the fuck over it. Mitch views himself as a starter. You know what I mean? Like, and do you think he was happy that like he came off the bench? And he even joked about it last year in the playoffs, right? Where he was like, and they were getting into like, 8, 10, 12-point deficits. And then he'd come in and then all of a sudden the Knicks would play well. It's like, guys understand what's happening and they can feel however they feel about it. The point is you want guys that are ultimately not going to rock the boat too much. And I don't think Josh Hart would rock the boat if he's not a starter, even if he feels that he should be, and that he deserves to be and whatever. Like, I think he'll do what's best for the team. That being said, like, if it is to become a problem, then that's something that the Knicks will need to address. And, you obviously don't hope that because he's been somebody who I think is like, I get why fans have been really, really on his case after last season. I also think it's not even just a little bit. I think it's a lot of bit misguided. He's not the one that chose to play himself that many minutes. And I'm sorry if a coach is effectively going to leave it up to you to tell him when you're tired or whatever. Most guys are just not going to come out of the game. Like, that's how these dudes are wired. They're not just going to try to come out of the game.
Unless you're like Shaq, Celtics, whatever. And
yeah, but like if you're in prime players are not asking to come out of the basketball game. So, we don't need to relive the whatever the hell, I don't know how Tibbs viewed Josh Hart, but I promise you nobody views Josh Hart as highly as Tom Thibodeau, not even Josh Hart. So whatever, like that was its own thing. And, obviously, like you said, Mike Brown's a new coach. He's a different coach. He's going to have his own views on personnel. He's going to have his own views and ideas on how this team is best utilized. And Josh, and it's not just Josh, right? It's not just Josh. There's a lot of guys that have to adjust. And that could be in what the demands are of them, offensively, defensively, in their roles, right? Minutes and all that type of stuff. We already saw it, right? He referenced yesterday or with Brunson, like, hey, we're going to have, I really want to get Brunson off ball more and get him easier shots that way, right? Not just I want him off the ball. Not like, you know what I mean? It's not like he's like, we got to get Jalen Brunson off the ball. He's terrible. but more like, hey, I want to get shots, easier shots for him, so that he's not having to create so much of his own offense. That's kind of what he was getting at, and that's also on Brunson, right? Brunson has to buy into that too. So like it's going to be an adjustment for Brunson. It's going to be an adjustment for all these guys. They're all going to have to adjust to what he wants. Maybe Josh Hart's going to be the one that has to adjust the most. So be it. Like that's if that's a sacrifice that needs to be made, that's a sacrifice that needs to be made. And he'll have to get on board with that. And if that's an issue for him, then yeah, the Knicks will have to deal with it. But like for the time being, and based on what we've seen of Josh Hart in New York, what we've seen of Josh Hart in his career, you know, again, even if it is a problem, I don't think it will manifest as any type of crisis issue for the Knicks that is sinking synergy or will result in Josh Hart sulking and not playing hard or whatever. Another bit of news that we did get regarding Josh Hart, which I think is of more interest, is that the finger he had surgery on a finger on his shooting hand last year or last in the offseason. That was a successful surgery, but then he re-aggravated it after the fact, and it is now still janked up. He said he plans on playing through it with a splint, and we'll see how it manages, and then get surgery again next offseason. But I think, in what he said, he seemed to leave the door open to, like, if it is bad, and if I just cannot actually play, then, like, yeah, then I'll get the surgery in season. Which, I find that interesting more so because now of like the smoke, or not the smoke, but like of the veterans the Knicks have added and stuff like that. But all that being said, what do you think about that? Because I feel like that is definitely way more concerning than Josh Hart's potential emotions about getting benched or whatever. I think the shooting, that is obviously a concern. He said he heard it, if I remember correctly, he said he heard it at some point during the Boston series. During the Boston series is when his shooting completely fell off just fell off. He was obviously could not hit the fucking broadside of a barn against the Pacers. But that also could just be, that can also just be small sample size, whatever. I don't know how much the finger is affecting him, how much it's going to affect him. None of us know other than Josh Hart. But that's definitely, if that's going to be a problem, I think that's something that they should be able to figure out as a problem early in training camp. And if we don't hear anything by like early next week about, Josh Hart's going to go get surgery again on it, I would assume that it's a good chance he's just going to play out the year with that thing.
I'd probably give it a little more time than that. I think you want to see how he looks in preseason. I do think just shooting in games is way different. But yeah, obviously that's a way bigger concern because whatever you think of Josh Hart, he is going to be a very important contributor for the Knicks. If they're, I think you and I would both say that goal this year is championship, right?
Yeah,
at least the finals loss. You lose to Oklahoma City in 6 games, fine. Or Jokic goes off, right? We're used to losing to Hall of Fame centers in the finals. This is not last year even where we're like, you got to go to the Eastern Conference Finals. It's not. Everybody's hurt. You're at worst the second best team in the East, and you're not far behind the first, even from the most pessimistic prognosticators. A little alliteration for you. Yeah, it's concerning. I mean, it's a player who doesn't like to shoot anyway. Does that feed into that? There's also like, this is a guy who lays out and grabs balls, but he gets those balls at an extremely high rate. That's a big part of his value. Which, to my knowledge, you need your fingers for that. Probably all 10 of them. The opposable thumbs might be the most important, but it's definitely concerning. I think to your point, I think the worst situation where it'd be like, well, he can't shoot, but he can still do these other things, and if it becomes a thing where he's just not going to be as effective this season, but they're like, let's let it ride because we don't have confidence in Dadier, or we don't think Yabusele can play more minutes. Do you happen to know what the implications for finger surgery would be. Like, I think we both, you've said this about the Bills a bunch. I would imagine you feel the same thing about the Knicks. It's April and May and June that matter. So if it's a thing where like he gets surgery now and then he comes back in February or March with some runway, and then he's back for the playoffs, I'd way rather have that than, we have enough to manage without him.
So when he first got the surgery, the prognosis was 6 to 8 weeks. So that would be what the season doesn't start until end. So it'd be like a month into the season, basically. So end of November, or let's say at the end, at the long end of that time frame would be towards the end of November, early December.
Yeah, so to me, that makes your training camp diagnosis. Yeah, if there's any risk, if he's like 75% of the player, just fucking do it. Like, they can survive 6 weeks without Josh Hart in the regular season.
Yeah, no, 100%. And that's exactly what they should do. I don't think this. I mean, I know that players ultimately, like, they have a say in what happens, but if he's trying to like gut it out for the team, I think it needs to be made clear to him, like, hey, dude, that's awesome. Thank you very much for like trying to do that for the team. But what we would prefer you to do is to go get the surgery done, because we need you for everything else. Like, we don't need you for the opening month of the season. Like, we could finish as the fucking 5th seed, and if everybody's healthy, that's better to us than,
And that's still pretty unlikely, like, especially if
right.
it's gonna be the 6th round, right?
Right. And so it's just like, it just needs to be made clear to him, like, if he's struggling, if it's clearly an issue, that like, go get this fixed, man. Like, we're not, we don't need 70% of you. We saw that shit in the Indiana series. That was not good for you. That was not good for us. That wasn't good for anybody. We need the best version of you, right? We need the best version of you. And that version of you can help us win games, series, right? Like, ultimately, hopefully, a championship. That's what we need. So, yeah, I think Josh Hart is, again, I think he's gotten too much shit after the season. I thought last year, and I'm sure I'm guilty of it too. Like, at times it became just an obvious thing to focus on, just an obvious thing to focus on, because of how clear it was that the starters weren't functioning, and how often so much of it felt like, hey man, they're just not defending Josh. They're just not defending him on the floor at all. Like, you got to do something about it.
And
but
he's not bringing enough on defense, right? So.
Right. And I mean, yeah, his defense fell off a fucking cliff over the last basically like year and a half that he's been on the floor with the Knicks.
And I don't think, and we both said it's not
Yeah.
effort, and it's not that he doesn't bring value, but I think people would hopefully realize
he's scatterbrained. His brain's been everywhere. I think he's got
and that gets
too much
exacerbated
shit on
playing
his
40
plate.
minutes a night, right? Like,
Right. I think he had too much on his plate in terms of minutes. He had too much on his plate in terms of minutes, and he had too much on his plate in terms of like what Tibbs wanted him to do, which was like, hey, like, I want you to get rebounds. I want you to push the tempo. Like, you're giving him all these responsibilities. And like, I think that's fine as a change of pace, but it clearly became too much for him, especially again in the minutes that he was being played. And yeah, it just, it slipped. I think it didn't help that like Tibbs allowed it to. Like, I think it's easy and convenient, and it's naive really for me that I feel like so many fans expect players to never let their own standards slip, right? Never let complacency creep into your game. But that's just not like how it works. Like you have to constantly be kept on your toes. And maybe the best of the absolute best, like the stars, the superstars, they're kind of in their own category. But for a guy like Josh Hart, who I think so much of his game is played, I don't want to say, so much of it is like instinctive, and he gambles, and he's going to kind of get a little wild and crazy at times. I think you do need, and he's not a star, right? It's not like he can do wild and, it's not like he can, this is like, prime Westbrook, right? At his best, he would do insane shit on defense that would cost you, but you lived with it because you were like, okay, well, he'll get like, like he's going to cost us more on defense than he helps us, but he'll get 2 steals a game that'll end up being like dunks, and then he's going to score, 35 and give us 12 assists, and it'll be worth it because of that. Josh Hart's not that type of player. He's not going to he can't give you enough offensively to just constantly live with the defensive mishaps over the period of time that he was playing, right? 37, 38, 39 minutes. Especially when like he's not giving you value unless he has the ball in his hands, right? It's not like he has value as a floor spacer. It's not like he has value in those ways. So much, it just became so complicated, I think, trying to fit him in. And then his game slipped. His game just slipped. I mean, his standards slipped, I think, defensively. He's kind of openly talked about this, right? Where he's like, I saw things I was doing defensively and it was embarrassing. And it's like, I don't even deny that he felt those things watching film of himself, but in the actual moment of the games, right? When it counts, in the actual moment, if you're not being held accountable and there is no accountability for you, then you are going to kind of, those standards are going to slip. You're kind of, the way you evaluate yourself, what the standards you hold yourself to can slip. And I think it was important for Josh, maybe more than anybody in that sense, to have a new voice on the sideline. And hopefully a voice that will challenge him. Hopefully a voice that's not just going to be like, oh my God, I love Josh Hart. I got to have him on the floor all the time because he gets rebounds. Like, we know what Josh Hart can be defensively. And while I don't ever think that I don't think he ever is or has been or will be an elite defender, he can definitely be a plus defender. And he wasn't even close to that last year. He wasn't even close. I think you could argue he was the worst defender of the starting 5 at times. And maybe
the 2 liabilities.
I think you can.
He had more on his plate, but yeah.
I don't think he had much on his plate defensively. He did not. He never guarded the best player in the opposing team. He never guarded the second best player in the opposing
help
team.
responsibilities on the wings because Cat and Brunson are so
right, and he did
limited.
them horribly, or he just didn't do them at all, and that is in some ways more destructive than the guys that you're kind of like scheming around to, like you're scheming around those guys as known entities, as bad defenders. Whereas Josh Hart's supposed to be a plus defender, and he's hurting you. So, look, I'm not. You're right. He's obviously not. You're right. He's not the biggest liability on the team. But there were definitely stretches where you felt like that, where it was like, what the hell, Josh? Like, you're supposed to be one of the good ones, and you're killing us out here. And that can't happen. And hopefully that doesn't happen with less minutes and a coach that's going to hold them more accountable than he was last year, where it was like, even like it never mattered, right? We talked about it. It didn't matter how well Deuce played or how bad Josh Hart played. Josh Hart was going to close games over Deuce McBride. Like that was just it. It was never going to happen the other way around. And I think that is something we don't avoid. And I think that should be something that you strive for in a lot of ways. Like we've talked about this with, like, I think there should be games where neither Deuce or Josh Hart close, right? And Mitchell Robinson closes. I think there should be games where maybe Josh Hart does close. Maybe Josh Hart's going really good. You close with him. Maybe there's a game where, like,
Yabusele, right? He might close some games too.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. All of these things should be on the table. And I think, a coach that's more willing to lean into those alternative kind of lineup combinations and really ultimately players to Josh Hart, I think that can help everybody, Josh Hart included. Okay, you touched upon it. We can kind of get to it now. Mike Brown, obviously the new head coach of the Knicks. I want to touch on something he mentioned yesterday at the press conference. Let me get the exact quote, but he said something along the lines, and let me get it here. Okay. Here we go. Just the summary. These things getting to the corners, especially guys who can shoot and or make plays. Doesn't matter who our 1, 2, 3, 4 are going to be interchangeable. Our 5 will pretty much do the same thing every time, whether it's a rim run or a trail spot fill. Do you have any thoughts on that quote?
You said a trail spot fill, right?
Yeah. A rim runner or a trail spot he'll fill.
Yeah, I mean, I would have liked to hear him. This is the guy who was the coach when Sabonis became a hub, right? I would have liked to see him talk about like the center doing the same thing every time. To me, is like, well, we want to see some Sabonis stuff, right? With Cat, like he might not be, as adept as a ball handler or as shifty, but we know you can do some of those things. We know he can pass, particularly from standstill. Obviously, the gravity is way more than Sabonis, so I would have hoped to hear about that. I think he wants structure in the offense. I think I would go more on what we've seen in Sacramento, what we've seen from his previous places. We talk about, well, Jordi Fernandez. Is it Jordi or Jordi?
I think it's Jordi. Or no, it's Jordi. It's Jordi. It's Jordi. He's Catalan, not Spanish, so the J is pronounced.
Jordi Fernandez. But even when you have these assistants, you pick up things over time, right? Jim Harbaugh is an offensive coach, but you get a guy like Fangio, now Jesse mentor, you pick up things on defense, right? And that becomes part of your philosophy. So I don't think I wouldn't read too much into it. I would have liked to see him say something about how, yeah, I don't think you should use Cat and Mitch the same way.
Yeah. I think that I just thought the quote was interesting. As far as like, because Tibbs really would never outline even anything like that, right? He would maybe tell you that they value the corner three. That was like, they value the corner three. Drive.
They want to keep people out of the paint on defense.
Yeah,
and
drive, find the pressure. Yeah, find the open man. Like, and Brown said some of those same things, but I think it gives you an idea of like, it seems very clear to me he wants the paint open, right? That's the main takeaway I get from that, where it's like, if you're filling both corners, there's a couple of things about this too. If you're filling both corners, that's fine and good, and it's something that a lot of teams strive for in the modern NBA, with kind of just obviously the premium on spacing and scoring and offense and optimizing offensive output. Your floor balance is really, really key, because there will be plays then, especially with a rim runner, or if you're running a pick and roll out of that, you can have four guys that are all below the free throw line. And we saw last year a lot of instances like that. And it was, it wasn't necessarily even that the corners are filled. The Knicks spacing was just fucking shit show last year. There were so many instances where you'd have four guys, five guys even, on certain possessions that are all below the free throw line. It makes it impossible to get back in transition. So I'm interested to see how, like, the balance of wanting both corners filled, all that stuff. I want to see how that kind of ties in with improving the floor balance defensively to protect against transition opportunities, which was one of the Knicks' big Achilles heels defensively, and really was, really, really has killed them against Indiana 2 years in a row in the playoffs. So interested to see that. I thought the quote about the fives was interesting. And I think, I'm assuming that there are people that will be like, how can you use Towns and Mitch interchangeably at the five? They have totally different skill sets. But if you kind of look at the quote, he's saying it can either be a rim run or a trail. And obviously Mitch is going to be rim running. I think that's safe to say. I don't think they're going to have Mitch doing too much trailer, not too many trailer threes for Mitchell Robinson. But I think it tells you that Cat is going to have the option to do both. But the fact that he outlined the trail three, that was just something we didn't even, I don't even know if Tibbs ever talked about it. I don't know if he ever talked, I doubt he probably ever did, about just hey, we want to get more trailer threes for Cat. That's actually part of what we're doing. I think the fact that, obviously he didn't explicitly say that here, but the fact that he even mentioned that the five will either, again, rim run or trail fill, I thought that was pretty interesting. And not even interesting, but more just encouraging to hear. And also, you can talk about potentially Yabusele also in that role, right, where he's a guy who can play the 5. So it'll be interesting to see how that's all managed. But um, I don't think there was too much insightful stuff that came out of media day, mostly because who the fuck is gonna say anything meaningful in front of the media ever? Um,
Leon Rose, if he ever did a press conference.
right? Yeah, Leon's gonna let up all the secrets. Uh, so I mean, I don't know. We can we'll finish with the or not to finish the pod, but to finish
Yeah,
the
so the only thing I would add is, yeah, I mean, it's good to see him. I think he mentioned getting Brunson off ball. Like, I think to me, what I'm really interested in seeing is everyone talks about Bridges. We know there's limitations there. Can you get some of that Sabonis stuff out of Cat? Like, maybe he's not going to talk about it, and that's fine. That is what I'd like to see. And the other part of it is, if you're using Mitch primarily as a rim runner, well, we have Cat and Brunson. If you have that big lineup, the double big lineup, I think one thing that worked pretty well is Mitch in that dunker spot, right? And let Cat and Brunson run a pick and roll, because it's different than Hart, because when Mitch is in that dunker spot, you can't leave him open. Hart, you can recover and block that. You leave Mitch, you're opening up an alley-oop, or just an offensive rebound opportunity, right? If you don't have a body on him, motherfucker's getting the offensive rebound. So those are the two things I would add there. Like,
yeah.
I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to have Mitch below the free throw line.
No, it's definitely not. I think you want Mitch below the free throw line. I mean, none of these things. There's nothing that none of this is like bad in isolation. It's just how does it all blend together. And look, we can be obviously they won 51 games last year. They got to the Eastern Conference Finals. It's not like everything they did last year needs to get thrown out either, right? Like there's things that they did that you want to build on, but there's also things that you want to be like, hey, we need less of this. We need to diversify what we do, and that's why Mike Brown was brought in, right, to diversify kind of the offense, to give to get other guys involved more often, and not just lean so much on Jalen Brunson to create, and not just lean so much on Karl Anthony Towns to be brilliant individually. It's to create that kind of connectivity, I guess. And I'll just say, like, I think the best they looked in terms of like after that December where they had a cupcake schedule and they just destroyed teams and were really, really rolling offensively. I thought the best they looked after that in terms of just like cohesive team play, all that stuff. That stretch when Brunson was out, they had like some games where it was like they were really like popping the ball around and it was more flowing and you got, OG got
So
going.
he's the problem.
Yeah, Brunson's the problem. No, but I think they were overly reliant on him. And I think there's more talent on the roster than I don't think that they got the most out of every piece on the roster as much as you would have expected. They got the absolute best out of Brunson. I think Karl Anthony Towns probably had one of his best offensive seasons of his career. And even within that, you would be like, would have been nice for him to shoot more threes.
He had a pretty good
Josh
OG
Hart,
season. Maybe not OG's best season, but it was up there.
Yeah, and Josh Hart probably had like his best individual offensive season, and yet you felt it, right? Like the collective sum of this is less than it should be.
Yeah, I mean, I'll add to that, right? Because you want things that people are constantly reacting to that open up other things, right? And I'll give you a little bit of a homer example. I don't know how closely you've watched Michigan football. Oklahoma was a disaster. I think it's his own thing. But especially the two games where Sharon Moore wasn't around, like this is the first time. This never seemed to be the case in the Harbaugh era. They ran the ball 50 times a game, rarely saw play action, no RPOs. Everything kind of connects to each other, right? You run the bubble screen, and then that opens up something that the same look. Now you run, you run a split zone or something, right? That's what you like. One, it's the ISO, right? But it's the different actions you run. how well do they? And I think basketball is much easier to do these kind of things with different counters and stuff because it's not so formation based. It's more fluid. Um, but I think that's what you really want to see is that you're constantly stressing them. It's even if there aren't reads, even if you pre-plan what you're doing, if the looks you give them force them to make choices, then you punish with another choice. And force and it all connects, right? Because if you're running disparate things, then the defense knows what's coming. So I just want to add that in there. But yeah, like I think watching Michigan especially, and I've seen this with I don't even talk about the Eagles play calling, but you see this in football. Like there are still teams that don't run what appear to be cohesive offenses, where this look that runs a screen is also this look that looks like a screen and is actually a draw or is a an ISO or and I'm not even talking about like the Shanahan motion shit. I'm talking about just like you have to prepare for multiple different things and it strains you. That's different from like guys just making plays, right? And I think that's why you would see the disparity you're talking about, or a big part of it.
Yeah, no, for sure. Moving on. Do you have a preference on the starting thing? Because I got into an argument last night. I don't want to say an argument, but it's a conversation, I guess. A spirited conversation on on the Twitter app. I'm not going to call it what it's called now.
The Nazi
about
app?
Yeah, the Nazi app, about who should be starting for the Knicks, and I think like I get the argument for Mitch. Obviously, I even would say that it would not surprise me if that's our best lineup. Like that probably is or might be our best lineup. I get the argument for Josh Hart. Like you can sell me on the notion that starting lineup from last year should never have been as bad as it got. And it needed a little bit more fine tuning and coaxing of specific things that requires a new coach. And maybe that lineup will be awesome now. I don't personally feel that's the way to go, but if that's, maybe that's true. So I can at least see that viewpoint, even if I don't fully agree. But to me, it's like very straightforward. I think it definitely should be Deuce McBride. And the reason is there are multiple reasons for it. One, if Mitchell Robinson, if I trusted his health, if I trusted him to stay healthy, if I didn't think he needs to be managed very carefully, it would be Mitchell Robinson. Mitchell Robinson would start, and I don't think there'd be any question about it. But that's not the world we live in. Mitchell Robinson has not stayed healthy for years now. Mitchell Robinson has not played and has not shown the ability to play 28 to 30 plus minutes consistently and maintain his level and stay healthy. I don't need Mitchell Robinson to be at his best in December or January or February or March. I need him to be at his best in late April moving on. And that is all that matters to me on Mitchell Robinson. So I would not start Mitchell Robinson because I think that the minutes load is tricky. The other part of this is if you start Mitchell Robinson, now your bench will have Deuce McBride, Jordan Clarkson, Malcolm Brogdon, Josh Hart, and Yabusele. There's ways that you can work all those guys in, but that team is very, very tricky if you have four perimeter guys basically coming off the bench that need
there's part of that, right? I think it would make sense to stagger Brunson and Cat, right? So that means you're adding another subpar defender to that lineup because you're not just gonna. It'll likely be Cat, right? Even if McBride starts, but yeah, you're going one of the. Would you agree, right? One of those guys is going to be with the bench. So
yeah, and I think that that makes that it's just too. I don't think you can have all four of those perimeter guys kind of on the bench. Even if you want to say Josh Hart's a four, like okay, well then what's Yabusele? So Yabusele's only going to play five. I just think it becomes very tricky. And again, I understand that hopefully we're not going to do, basketball lineup substitutions, and we'll be more willing to mix and match. I just think the mixing and matching still has to come with a starting lineup that allows for you to maximize it. And I just to me, you start Deuce, He gives you the best point of attack defender on your roster in your starting lineup. He now allows Mikal Bridges and OG Anunoby to conserve some energy defensively at times and also roam and cover more space and protect Brunson and Cat more. And again, this means that Mitch Robinson can come off the bench so you can more carefully monitor kind of his minutes as the season goes along. And then off your bench, you have, Brogdon and Clarkson and Josh Hart, and then you have Yabusele, and then you still have Huck Ford if you want another center to go to. To me, that makes a lot more sense than than starting Mitch. I just don't. I don't know. I don't see the argument for that. Or I do see the argument for it. I just think the way they've constructed this roster, it feels very much like this is Deuce's job. And I don't want to, that's not, I think Deuce is probably the leader in the clubhouse. It's probably the best way I could put it. That does not mean that he can't lose that lead or that he'll be handed the job. I think he needs to win it. But I have enough faith in what I've seen from Deuce McBride, especially in a role where he would be the fifth option, right? So the fact that he's not this dynamic off the ball creator is significantly more mitigated in that lineup, and his strengths are accentuated, right? The fact that are there going to be guys that can, that can overpower him at the point of attack and all that kind of stuff? Sure, we can figure that out. But the fact that you give him that he is a really good point of attack defender, it accentuates and amplifies the strengths of the other guys, Mikal and OG. The fact that he's a good screener for Brunson, we've seen Brunson have a lot of success attacking guarded screens. And we've seen Deuce have a lot of success popping off of those screens. So to me, and then now you also have you're truly 5 out, right? This would be a true 5 out lineup. It gives Brunson more space to operate. It gives all these guys more space to operate, which we knew and saw was an issue last year. I think it should be Deuce. I'm not going to lose my mind if it's Mitch because I think that lineup is actually, again, I think it's probably our best lineup. It's not about that to me. It has nothing to do with, do I think Mitch is, should he start? If he was healthy all the time, I'd be like, yeah, start him. No question. That's not the case. And I also think again, to the point of not losing my mind, regardless of what is the decision of who starts, we're going to see all these lineups plenty in the regular season. And hopefully Mike Brown isn't a Tom Thibodeau guy and is going to mix and match more and is going to use more varied combination and give things more opportunities. Ultimately figuring it out over the course of the season and just being prepared for the playoffs and knowing what options you have at your disposal and what they're capable of and who they're best matching up against. I think those are really the keys to everything for the season.
So let me before I give my opinion, let me posit this, right? So this is something I've said. Against Detroit, I would have started Mitch. I think neither of us wanted to start Hart at all in the playoffs by that time. Detroit, I would have started Mitch. Boston, I would have started Mitch. Indiana, irrespective of Mitch's health, I think Deuce was the way to go. Do you think it's a fair breakdown or analysis?
Yes. Yeah.
I think you're going to want both in your holster. I know this is something that this is not a Thibodeau thing, right? No team is going to switch up their starting lineup like that. If we were to beat Indiana and play Oklahoma State in the final, I would have said Mitch should start, right? So against most teams, I do still think you're going to want Mitch to start. It solves the two biggest problems with the team on the starters. You have your point guard is not a point of attack defender, and your center Cat is not a rim protector. So you lack rim protection, and you lack point of attack defense. So depending on how the other team is going to play, one becomes a little bit more important than the other, right? I think on offense, it's actually a little bit of a wash because that's just how impactful I think Mitch is on offense. But against a team like Indiana, where they're pulling you out with, I think actually in the past, Mitch has had trouble with stretch fives. I think he did a pretty good job on Miles Turner, but it still opened up the paint. So you're getting less out of that, right? If Cat was going to be out there, Now you say that maybe they're going to put Cat in pick and roll no matter what, right? That's what they did. They had Mitch get drawn to the corner by Turner and run pick and roll with other guys and attack Cat. But it depends on the team, right? So I think you want both looks. And I do think the majority of teams, it's Mitch is going to be the better look. But I think for the reasons you mentioned, so the reasons you mentioned, I think are all valid. The other thing is we just haven't seen much of this lineup. And as much as you can say, well, Brown isn't going to be Tibbs, he'll play that lineup. It becomes like during the game, it becomes trickier to make subs. I want to see how that lineup looks. I think anyone should. How do Brunson and Cat look in 5 out with a great point of attack defender? How does Mikal Bridges look on defense? By the that is, you've invested a lot of money into him too, right? And, the analogy I'll use is this is not, you can say, well, do you want your 6'4", OG, you can think of like a 6'7" cornerback if he's playing the point of attack, right? But this is like playing a 6'7" at nickel when you'd rather have him at safety, right? When he can freelance. And we've seen this. OG Anunoby is a great defender. He's not Kawhi Leonard. There's a great Grantland article, and I'm showing how old it is, talking about, the Spurs facing the I think it was the Heat or it was facing Jimmy Butler, and what the other team was doing, I forget, it was the Bulls or the Heat. They would essentially, the Spurs were putting Kawhi Leonard on Jimmy, so they would have Jimmy just stay out. Kawhi's essentially face guarding him, or he's staying attached to him, and they play 4-on-4. That was worse for the team. But Popovich adapted and had Kawhi playing off of Jimmy in a more of a free safety role, and their defense improved quite a bit. As good as OG is, one, there are defenders who you don't want him playing a point of attack against. So what that Kawhi example shows is sometimes the most, the intuitive thing is put your best guy. That's what in football we used to say the same thing, right? Put your best guy, lock down half the field. If you don't want to, Charles Woodson is a good example of that, right? Like, especially later in his career, you can say, well, maybe he wasn't quite as adept at being a lockdown corner, but it made him much more valuable to be able to roam the field, to do a bunch of different things. OG and Mikal off ball, and especially Mikal, and I'll get to that in a second. Now you have 14 feet in those passing lanes. You have them closing out on threes instead of maybe Brunson having to close, or Brunson will still be in the lineup, but instead of Josh Hart closing out on those threes, right? You have them flying, you have them generating more turnovers. So that's number one. And number two, there are specific limitations both of those guys have. Obviously, Mikal, it's a much more pronounced. But we saw OG in that Sixers series. He struggled with Tyrese Maxey. That's just a fact. Am I going to kill OG over that, or say he's not a good defender because he can't guard one of the quickest players in the league who's several inches shorter? No. I think there are lots of good guards. I think if you put him on John Moran, he's fine. But he has some that you don't want him point of attack on everybody. And it's fair to argue that anyone is going to look bad against a guy like Maxey, who just has a very versatile game. But Deuce is better equipped for that challenge, especially now if he has OG roaming behind him. OG Anunoby, right? He has another disadvantage that if Deuce is at the point of attack, he has OG Anunoby behind him. OG Anunoby has no OG Anunoby behind him. He has Bridges, but Bridges would also be present behind Deuce. And then the big issue is they were primarily using Bridges. One, we can debate to death whether he should have gone out after screen, over screens, or should have done a better job, getting through them. Fact is, he struggled. It's not the strength of his game. We do know he has defensive strengths, right? We saw him close out 2 games in Boston with deflections, with being in the right place, with using his length. That's what he's good at. He's good at recovering. He's good at weak side defending. He can make those rotations. So you're now putting a guy who you invested all this money in, by the way, and invested all those picks into something that he can actually add a lot more value. And then that also it's a feedback loop, right? Deuce gets better at the point of attack because he knows those guys have his back, and they can be more aggressive off ball because they know that this point guard isn't getting a clean pass off. He's not coming off a screen with Cat dipping and them having to worry about the center. They're going to get better looks, right? It is like, I'm going with all these football analogies, but yeah, Deuce is like the pass rusher who's pressuring the quarterback. It makes things easier for the defensive backs to get picks. That's what they love. They love playing with great defensive ends, great pass rush. And the last thing I'll mention is, you look at, Deuce is just I think that's what I would end it with, is like Deuce. Yeah. So on that kind of pressure point, it's also something that we've been frustrated with for a couple of years. This does not affect the offensive side of that. It might even make it worse if you think that Josh was better at bringing the ball up than Deuce. But on the defensive side, it has been difficult. This isn't transition defense the way you mentioned it, but it has been frustrating to watch teams like the Pacers or the Celtics get into their offense with 18, 19 seconds left, put the Knicks through 3-4 different actions, and then watch the Knicks start their offense with 17 seconds left on the shot clock, with Brunson with his back turned to the basket, right? They can now start to do that, right? We saw that full court pressure, or it's not 40 seconds of hell like Arkansas, but having the guy pick up the point guard, having your defender pick up the point guard close to full court, it slows down their ability to get into their offense. That has its impact too. That's also what Deuce gives you, which you wouldn't want to do with OG, right? Because now you probably cross-match elsewhere. They could bring it up with somebody else, and he's not going to, that's not something you're taking away his ability to affect the rest of the game. So I think on those fronts, on defense, those have a lot of advantages. Does that compare to Mitch's rim protection? Again, it depends on the team. There's going to be guys that can cook Deuce too, and you have to be flexible and adapt to that. And there's going to be times where, you just have a rough shooting night, or teams can switch everything and 5-out doesn't work that well. And you want to be able to muck it up, and somebody who can just get you out extra possessions. There's going to be lots of games like that. And so I think it's a very even split. I think the reasons that I would enlist are, one, there's a big case for, I think Deuce and Mitch overall is pretty even in terms of what it does for the team and the impact. Two, the reasons you mentioned, most notably Mitch's durability and wanting to have him clean in April, May, and June. And third, I will say we just haven't seen this lineup, and I would want to see that lineup. Like, I want to know how Cat and Brunson look together in 5-out. Even if you say Deuce isn't the long-term answer, guess what? You're like, that's a question that we're going to need to answer, right? If the Knicks lose in the Eastern Conference Finals or the finals next year, that is the question that a lot of people are posing. Can you win a championship with Brunson and Cat being defensive at best minuses, at worst liabilities? Can you win with them both playing? Part of that is, how effective can you be with 5-out? And if you have very good proof of concept, you might say, like, look, we can upgrade on Deuce here. We don't need to stick with Deuce, but we can see what this looks like when we have 5-out. And so that gives you kind of a little bit more data, not just on how Deuce looks with the starting 5, but how a 5-out lineup looks with those two guys. And if it's enough to offset their defensive limitations with OG and Mikal not having to play the point of attack. So I think that's a very important data point too, that long-term matters.
Yeah, and I think also just like, in an ideal world, you're a really good defense, you're really good offense. Like, that's ideally how you want to win a championship, right? Is that you're solid on both ends of the floor, so you have multiple ways to win games consistently. In reality, in the actual world, and I think this is actually increasing, because what I feel is happening is the talent pool in the NBA is, I don't want to say it's flattening, I think that's the wrong word, but there is more talent, and the worst teams are still really bad. They're still really, really fucking bad. But you see this, right, where it's like the 10th team in each conference still has like some really good players on it. And they're usually, I feel very, very confident about saying
and there's
this.
less incentives to tank too, right?
Right.
So,
and I feel very confident about saying this. If you compare like the 10th best team in each conference last year to the 10th best team in each conference from 10 years before, it's no question which team is better. And I'm not saying this to gas up this current generation. What I am saying,
no, but I think you can even control. You can say that the gap between the 10th best team and the best team 10 years ago would probably have been larger than the gap between the 10th best team and the best team this year, right? So.
Right, and so because of that, I think you have to be more willing. I think the standard of like how good do you need to be on each side of the ball is maybe different, and more importantly, I think you need to be able to or be willing to push the needle to like, okay, well, maybe we don't have a pathway to being a very good defense. Maybe the best thing we can hope for is average defense, but we might have a pathway to being a fucking crazy good elite offense, and that might be what we need to tap into to like get over the hump and get over to the top and win a title. And as like my proof of concept, I would just be like, look at the Pacers last year, a team that was not particularly strong defensively, but
they had a rim protector. That's what they could say, right? So
yeah, I mean, we have a rim protector, and even their rim protector got played off the floor at various points in the playoffs.
Well, the idea with Deuce is you don't have a rim protector.
Right. But I'm saying, but the main thing is that they could play without a rim protector and still win ball games. So they had multiple ways to do that. They didn't just like, oh, we have Miles Turner and now we can win. It's no, they won several playoff games. I mean, they won game one without Miles Turner on the floor because he was fucking awful in that game. Like the point is like you need different ways to win games, and sometimes you need to tap into, hey, you know what? We need to go into super duper offense mode. Like we just need to get the scoreboard going and make shots, and we'll try and challenge the other team to keep up. And if they can't keep up, then that's how we're gonna win this game. You need to have those options. You need to have that ability to do that when you have Jalen Brunson at the 1, you have Karl-Anthony Towns at the 5. Like you need to have lineups that are crazy good on offense, and that should be your superpower. Your superpower is not going to be that we're a dominant defensive team. I'm sorry, it's not going to happen. Like it's just not, because fundamentally and realistically, you're not closing games without Brunson on the floor for sure, and without Karl-Anthony Towns on the floor in most scenarios. Like, possession here, possession there for defensive purposes. Sure, those guys might not be on the floor. But if you're just talking about the last, 6 minutes of a tight ball game, they're going to be on the floor in almost every scenario. So you have to have like, what's our superpower with those guys on the floor? And that superpower needs to be, we cannot be worried about what we're giving up on defense, because we're always going to be giving up something on defense with those guys on the floor. What we need to worry about is how good can this offense be? And I don't know if Tibbs thought that, maybe he thought Josh Hart with, Brunson and Cat and OG and McCall, maybe he thought that was the best lineup that we had at our disposal offensively. I don't know what he was basing that on, but maybe he thought that. But like, I think there's a chance the Deuce with those guys, I think that could be like a really, really good, really great, potentially offensive lineup, even though on its face, it's like Deuce McBride himself is obviously not some fantastic offensive player. And I think getting that sample size, seeing what it looks like when you really go 5 out, that can inform your decisions moving forward, because presumably Brunson and Karl-Anthony Towns are pillar type pieces and not guys that are going to be here for the long haul. So kind of seeing what that is and informing what your decisions might be in season, if you need to make a move or, next summer or whatever, those are key things. But I do think it's important to really understand what your team is. Like you might want it to be something, but if it's not that, it's not that. Like, and I think Tibbs wanted this team to be something it wasn't last year, and that it could never be, really, like that it could never be. It could never be some dominant defensive unit. But what it had a chance to be is a dominant offensive lineup, and I don't know.
Good enough defense.
A dominant offensive lineup with a good enough defense, which is basically the formula that the Nuggets won. Not basically, it is the formula the Nuggets won a championship with. And yes, there'll be people.
And Indiana came very close,
right?
This year. If Tyrese Halliburton doesn't get hurt, God, this is the nicest thing I've ever said about him on this pod.
Yeah, they could have won. But like, Yeah, but like that, and that's the point. Is like you have to embrace what you have, and I think in this era, that's more important than anything. And I think in this era, you can still win with that. Like I don't, and I honestly like this whole like you couldn't win like that in previous eras. I don't know how true that is. Like the Suns are what? They're like a weird suspension of like Robert Ory and all these fucking things away from probably winning the championship. And what was that? 2005, 2000, whatever the fucking year that was, 2007 maybe. Like they're a suspension away from winning a championship, and maybe we think about basketball entirely differently if they win the championship when they should have won the
Yeah,
championship.
Gary Payton doesn't get hurt. Maybe the Sonics beat the greatest team of all time.
Right.
That
Yeah.
was not a.
Just
I
ask
mean, it was a
Gary Payton.
different defensive team, but yeah.
Yeah. But like, so like I think that, you know, really what I think the Knicks title chances boil down to and what they really need to be focused on. And I think they are focused on it, just looking at the acquisitions they've made and the way they're tilting this roster. Their best path to winning a title is being a 122 offensive rating. That's their best path. Their path is not to be, well, we'll be if we're top 5 on offense and we can be like a top 10 defense. Like that's not going to be it, man. That's not your best defense, or that's not your best path. Your best path is our team is built to score points. Our best players are built to score points. They, you have the 5 that should be able to spread the floor out, and you have a 1 who can make every shot on the floor. You have wings that are capable of attacking closeouts, and all you have everything else that you need. And hey, guess what? Like I know that Mitchell Robinson isn't traditionally in our brains thought of as like valuable, like highly valuable offensive player, but the Knicks have consistently fielded really good offenses even with Mitch on the floor. Why? Because he can get you extra possessions. So you still have that option to go bludgeon teams on the glass and get extra possessions and play more of a bully ball style, play more of like a road grading style. Rather than just spread it out and keep popping threes and getting to the hoop at ease and all that type of stuff. Like you still have those options, but no matter what way you look at it, no matter what lineup you look at it, I think all of the focus needs to be about, hey, how do we for 48 minutes every night make sure that we are maximizing our offensive output? What are the lineups that do that? What are the rotations that do that? What are the various looks that do that? What are the sets that do that? Everything about it needs to be about that. Because they're not going to win a championship because, they're going to fucking be the 2004 Pistons. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, I don't know if I would go that binary or extreme. Again, I'll go back and I'd say it depends on the opponent, right? Against a team like Detroit.
To be clear, just to be clear, I am not suggesting that they can be like 26th in defense and win. Like I think they have to be average-ish on defense to win. There's going
to be times when they play heavy defensive lineups. I do think there's defensive, not to be a lockdown. It's also how do you get there, right? And can you get some kind of synergy between defense and offense, right? Like I said, you have 6'7", 7-foot wingspan guys on the wings who can get in these passing lanes. You add a point of attack defender there. Now you're not just asking them to close out on threes and saying we'll limit the offensive output. Can you turn those into transition opportunities, right? Can you force teams to play faster, take tougher shots? You have multiple guys that can push. Even Deuce can, right? Like in transition, Deuce can get the ball up the floor, and he's capable of finding a trailer or making a simple read. So I do think like I wouldn't go so binary to say we need to lead in offense all the time. There's going to be tough defensive lineups, right? You can construct. I mean, if you go Brunson, Deuce, Mikal, OG, Mitch, that's a pretty good defensive lineup. I think that's a really good one. And you might want that in some games. For example, I think mucking things up against Boston was a good idea, right? With Mitch. Against Detroit, I would have liked them to maybe expand a bit, but Mitch also countered. Mitch was a better option than Hart, right? But maybe against Detroit, that was a time to open.
Could you have won that Pistons series if you just lit up the scoreboard? I think you win that series, and I don't think the Pistons can do anything.
And you wouldn't go 6 games. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And it wouldn't be 6 games of
so that's and I like maybe the Celtics series is just very weird to discuss because I think that as fun. I mean, look, it was just awesome. It was great to beat Boston. I don't think either of us is exactly not looking back at that series fondly.
This is not a Celtics
But if we're
show.
gonna taking off our fan caps though, and putting on like, okay, let's just be kind of look at this as objectively as we can. Like, you got mega fortunate game 1 and 2. Like you just did. Like, and that's part of the game. So I'm not trying to like. This is not me being, fucking Michael Pina and being like, the Celtics lost game 1 and 2. Here's why that's bad news for the Knicks. Like, no, I'm not doing that.
Who do you think
but what
was
I'm
the
saying
biggest
is like,
factor in winning those games?
I think it was Mitch, but again.
So sometimes
like,
you need that, right?
point is-
Sometimes you will still want to muck it
right,
up. That's
right. But Mitch helped you on both ends of the floor. He didn't just help you on defense. He helped you on both ends of the floor. And the point is, you should never be in a situation where the hopes and dreams of your team lie solely on the one player coming off your bench or whatever role he's in, right? Starter, whatever.
And they probably
he's
wouldn't have
not
fallen
like this-
behind if he started, right?
Right. And like, can you like the offense sucked. It sucked through the entire playoffs. Like, yes, they had individual games that were fine, but in totality, again, for like I think all of Tom Thibodeau's coaching career, he's had one postseason where they finished like, whatever, top half of all playoff teams in offensive rating, which was funny enough, the completely injury destroyed 23-24 Knicks. But like other than that, it's always been a slog for his teams. And I think part of that is, yes, tactical, the way they set up, the offensive approach in terms of like, bring the ball up slowly and we're going to milk the clock and all that type of stuff. But I was thinking some of it is just like, how are you using your personnel? What are you even trying to achieve? How are you proposing to get to the end goal of winning this game and series? And I look back at like, I think about the Piston series very specifically, where I'm like, to me, that's a series where, given our level of offensive talent and firepower, the fact that it went 6 games, and honestly, I think any of us being totally serious could be like, it's a coin flip. Like a couple of those games are coin flips, right? Game 4, you could easily lose that game if they call a foul on Josh Hart at the end of the fourth quarter. On the final shot of the game. And game 6 comes down to legit Brunson just insane God mode, like got shot making to close it out. Same thing happened at the end of game 4 too, by the way. Like that's how tight that series was, and it shouldn't have been that tight. Like it should, even if it's one of those things, right, where it's like, there are 6-game series where you like look back at it and you're like, yeah, but it was like never really that competitive, right? And it like, it was like that I remember there was that one Raptors Cavs series that won 6 games, and it was like, yeah, it was cool it won 6 games, but like we knew who was going to win that. It was never in doubt. And it's because if you probably count up the games, like if you count up the points, right, after the point totals of the series, it's like, oh yeah, the Cavs outscored them by like 90 points over 6 games or something. Like, yeah, they were way more dominant. That wasn't the case in that Knicks Piston series. So I think we might have scored the same exact points as them, the point totals. Whatever. I think the Celtics series, I think we ended up outscoring them marginally.
Because the last game was a blowout,
right? Right. And it's like, I just don't think you can live that way. Like, you've got to be able to consistently every game get points up. And that is our path to success. I'm not saying that like you can't have different approaches to it. And I'm not saying that a Mitchell Robinson isn't vital to your team. If anything, Mitchell Robinson is super vital, right? Because to the point you're making of like, well, you still need to have the ability to muck up games and get stops. Like, Mitchell Robinson is your best vehicle to do that. He is the best guy that can get you there. He's your best path, right? To like, what's our path to the first, like, what's our path to being 13th in defensive rating? Probably Mitchell Robinson and Deuce McBride. And like, it sounds kind of, I know, yeah, I know OG and McCall obviously are going to be part of that, but you get my point where it's like those guys playing more is probably your best pathway to that, more than they did last year. And I think both of those guys playing more can also help your pathway to like, how do we become this dominant offensive unit? And that is really, for me, like that is what this season is. And that's what the pathway to success is. because I do not see a world where the Knicks can merely be. I don't even think they can be really good on offense. I think they have to be fucking elite. I think they need to be challenging like all-time offensive rating level type shit to win a championship. That's what I think. I don't know how you win a championship with Jalen Brunson at the one and Karl Towns spending at least what, like 60% of his time at the five. I don't know how you do those things. And you're going to be, your pathway is like fifth best offensive rating in the league this year and ninth best defensive rating in the league. And that, like, because that's a pathway to a title, right? You can just be really good on both ends. That's a pathway. But to get, like, I want to get back to something you talked about, like the ability to muck up games. And how do you do that, right? So, like, you can be 15th and it feels bad, and you can be 15th and it feels good. Like, I think the Knicks last year ended up finishing, I want to say 12th to 13th in defensive rating, but it never felt like that, right? It never felt like, oh yeah, this team is on a run right now defensively. It felt like it never felt that way. And I think it's interesting. We've done a lot of football comparisons. I'm going to go to another one here, but it's interesting because you see this in football all the time. Like, the best example is the Chiefs, right? If you look at like all their advanced metrics over like the last couple of seasons as they've gone to Super Bowls and won Super Bowls, even their defensive metrics are like, I think other than one of those seasons, I want to say the 2023 season, their defensive metrics are like okay. But then they get to the playoffs and then they have game plan specificity and they have these things that they throw at you and they're able to muck. Yeah, yeah. And they're able to, and it's like, I mean, this happens all the time in football, right? There are defenses that are like terrible. They will just give you yards. But then it's like, hey, they get inside the 20, the 15, the 10. Once they're in that red zone, like, it tightens up and you can't punch it in and you're settling for field goals. Obviously, there's no clean parallel to that with the Knicks, right? But like, maybe your half court defense is worse, but can you make up for it because you're not giving up as many easy transition points, right?
Or like more of your stops are turnovers that lead to more points, right? Yeah.
Right. So like, there are different ways to go about it, and I think like that also shouldn't get lost in kind of the broader, philosophical discussion we're having of like, offense should be the leading thing or whatever. But like, even within whatever you think the defense should be, I do think they need more variety in how they approach the defense. And to your point, like in terms of forcing turnovers, like they generally were not a good turnover forcing team under Tibbs. I think they were better last year than they had been previously, but it's like there's just more ways. And can you force it? I felt there was a lot of teams could figure us out at times over the course of games and series where it's like once they kind of figured out what we were doing, it took a little bit of time, I thought, for Tibbs to adjust and maybe throw something else at them. So can you be more diverse? Can you be more willing to try things on the fly? And maybe some of those things won't work. I mean, look, put the cards on the table. We've played Mike Brown's Kings a few times, and there are a few times they went into a zone, or they put whatever, like, or there were times where we started putting Josh Hart as the screener and they were trapping Brunson, and then we were able to play 4-on-3 and destroy them from there. Like, there are things that we killed them with. So it's not like Mike Brown is perfect or anything defensively, but I do think it's important to try things and have more kind of developed pitches. So when you go into the playoffs, you're not just doing shit for the first time. Like again, with that Boston series, happy it worked, that we all of a sudden started switching more and it worked. But I think in another series, in another timeline, even though we started switching more, because we hadn't worked on that all year, some of our rotations weren't clean. I thought they got a lot of open looks, especially in the first two games of the series. I thought they really airmailed a lot of open looks. And is that a way, like, can you clean that up over the course of the regular season so when you need to go to that in the playoffs, it's more refined and guys are comfortable and they know what their rotations are, they know what they're doing. So maybe your regular season defensive rating isn't so great because you're trying all these different things, but then you get to the playoffs and you can reap the rewards of that.
Yeah, and I would say they did get exploited a little bit, right? Against Indiana, the switching didn't work as well, right? You can say Indiana is a better equipped team to exploit it than Boston because Boston isn't really a ball movement team so much as a shooting team. But yeah, I would totally agree with that. I mean, I'm wondering, like, look, if you do start Deuce, it opens up something else, right? Can you trap a little bit more, right? Because you've got all that length now, right? Deuce is long, pause, for a point of attack defender. He's 6'9". Brunson is smart about getting
Wingspan.
on the pass.
Wingspan, by the way,
Wingspan.
just so people know.
It's 6'2", obviously height, and then obviously we know about Anunoby and Bridges. I don't think we ever trapped, besides at the end of games, right? Like I remember, like Kyrie would just be fucking on a heater, then you start trapping him just to get the ball out of his hands. But strategic trapping, which is a boom or bust strategy, like you said, it's the kind of thing that maybe on aggregate in the regular season hurts you, but if it's something in your toolbox you can go to, and your guys know what they're doing a little bit, that's because, like we said, in the highest stakes series, you're often throwing stuff at the kitchen sink just to see what works. The more things you can throw, the better. And I also think we'll just, to the point you were making, not just switching, but not having cat and drop, whoever starts, that in itself should help the defense a little bit, right? Because that was his worst. I'm not saying he's going to be great switching or hard hedging. That should help quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, just look, if it sucks, it sucks. And guess what? Then you can go back to it. Like we can go back to something different. You can try, but it's once you realize something is bad, I don't know that the best way to go about it is like, well, it's bad. So, but if we just keep trying it, maybe it'll get better. Like, no, let's try something else and let's give that a real run of possessions or games and see how that works. Let's try zone. Let's mix in whatever, right? Hard hedging, trapping, flooding the strong side, whatever the hell you want to do. Like, there's all kinds of things you could try, but try them, like actually try them, and don't just try them in very, 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 very specific situations, right? Try them like over the course of periods of time so that you have legitimate samples. OKC, I mean, again, I don't want to like pretend, I don't think they've like discovered the secret to winning basketball, but obviously you should study successful teams. And, you look at kind of how they approach the regular season and, forgetting that they kind of use 12 guys or whatever, and they give different guys opportunities. They just try a lot of things schematically, especially on the defensive end. Offensively, they're pretty not creative to me. It's very much like SGA, go get us a bucket a lot of times. But like defensively, I think they're very creative. I think Daigneault tries a lot of different schematic looks, and he's willing to try different lineups. And it's like,
were they the first team to start putting a center on Hart? So remember, like we had the lead, and the first time we played them, we had a big lead. And then the fourth, our offense died.
They started that game with Hartenstein and Hart. I don't know if they were the first team to do it this past year, but I think they were definitely the team that like
everyone used that blueprint going forward.
Yeah, I think they kind of refined it maybe, and everybody, once it worked for them, it was like, oh well, if OKC's doing it, shit, we should do it too. Boston did it too in the opening game of the season. So it's not they weren't the first team, but I think they were the one that like it really got around the league after that. Maybe because they played this twice in a row, not twice in a row, but 2 times like in a week. Basically, it was literally in a week. So it just kind of really drove it home. But yeah, like I think that you want to see what, not just strategies, right? Not just different defensive strategies work, but what personnel do you have that are best in those strategies? So if you want to play zone, maybe you have guys that are better zone defenders than others. If you want to hard hedge, you have guys that are better at that, better at the backside rotations than others. All those type of things are relevant. Maybe if you just have a flat out bad defensive lineup, but one that's really, really fucking dynamic on offense, maybe you have to figure out what's the best way for me to at least, what's the least bad look here? So that's what I'm looking for. We'll see how it goes. I think that's a good place to end this. Yeah, go ahead.
Before we get out, I had a little bit of a hot take. I think Yabusele is going to be for us what Obi Toppin was for the Pacers last year, and what we'd always hoped Obi could be if given more of an opportunity here. It's different. I mean, he's not the vertical athlete that Obi is, but I don't think that's the best part of Obi's game, really. I think it's running the floor, the energy, the instincts. They're both underrated as passers, especially on the move, making decisions. Yeah, that's a hot take I just wanted to throw out real quick.
Yeah. No. I mean, I could see it. I think the one thing I will say is like I wouldn't put it past Mike Brown to maybe not to start the season, probably not to start the season, but at some point to like let's see what Yabu looks like in the starting lineup. I wouldn't be that optimistic about it just because I don't
That
know what
front
he
court is
provides you.
gnarly.
Yeah, it's a really bad defensive front court, but offensively, like you can see the firepower that has the potential there. So I wouldn't be surprised to see that. But I don't know about the Obi Toppin thing, but I do think Yabu can be a valuable piece. And again, it speaks to like the point of like I know there's a lot like with Knicks fans, there's a lot of debate over just how good was Obi Toppin in the playoffs last year. But like I think it was very obvious watching the Pacers that Rick Carlisle knew what situations to kind of like roll the dice on Obi's skill set with, and he delivered at various points. Do I think Yabu can be that type of player where it's like, look, man, the on-offs and all that type of stuff might not look great over the course of a postseason, but like, are there key moments where you roll the dice on the guy and he delivers and shows up? You know, he comes up big for you in a big spot. Like, yeah, I think he definitely has that type of potential for the Knicks. We'll obviously have to see how it goes. But yeah, the Knicks play in a week in Abu Dhabi. We'll see how that goes. They remain the second favorites in the East, plus 950 on FanDuel for anybody interested. All right. That is our show for today. Stacy, let people know they can find you and plug everything you like to plug.
I will plug. We have a cool retro recap article from Matthew Miranda that just got published, I believe, today. So Matt's been doing just recaps of past games. This one is Knicks Jazz from 1991. I mean, if you read the site, you know Matt is, if not the most talented writer, definitely one of them. And so I would say go check that out. It's always fun to read, and it's always fun to read about the old Knicks too.
Yeah, I will echo those sentiments. Matt has been somebody whose recaps I've been reading now for over a decade. Sounds insane to say. But starting from Posting and Toasting, now over to the Strickland, and hopefully he still, look, whenever if he wants to pick up the pen and write some rhymes about the Knicks, I'm sure we'll always be happy. I'm sure we will always be happy. But you know, he's on to bigger and better things, and I'm sure that he will be doing just fine as he moves along. So thank you to Matt for everything he's done for the site, which has been a lot, and I look forward to reading all of his work and endeavors moving forward. Yeah, all right, that is our show for today. Thank you to our sponsor, FanDuel, and I'll see you on Friday. Peace.